Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. We're glad you're here. And now our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. Today, I'm excited to share my conversation with Dr. Chris Lambert. Chris has committed his life to building healthy organizations that have a major, and I mean transformative, impact on their communities. We're going to talk about his personal journey, the organizational operating system he has created, and how you can build a dream team that better serves your customers and community as well. And while Chris's focus is on nonprofit leadership, I'm confident that there are some powerful insights here for those of us who work in business and government. So stay tuned. If you believe, as I do, that leadership is about inspiring people to learn more, do more, and be more, then get ready for a masterclass on leadership, because you're about to be inspired.
Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast, where we talk about better business results, stronger teams, more successful careers, and happier lives. Along the way, we hope to bust some biases, build some bridges, and have some fun. We're glad you're here. And now, our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
Let's meet our guest. Dr. Chris Lambert is founder, CEO of Life Remodeled, a community-based organization that has invested over $44 million into some of the toughest neighborhoods of Detroit, Michigan. And he's doing this by renovating Detroit school buildings to create opportunity hubs. He's beautifying city blocks and repairing homes. And it's not just Chris. It's not just the extraordinary team he's built, but he has harnessed the time and energy and resources of literally tens of thousands of volunteers to make this happen. His book, Next Level Nonprofit, explains how he and his team have accomplished so much in a relatively short period of time by implementing an organizational operating system that ensures that you attract and retain the best people who focus on the right things in a healthy culture. He's a graduate of Indiana University, Fuller Theological Seminary, and Gordon-Conwell Theological Seminary. So with that educational background, it's no surprise that he has been a missionary in Africa, a church planter, a pastor, and now the leader of one of the most successful nonprofits in the country. I am so excited to have this conversation with Chris. Chris Lambert, welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. I'm glad you're here.
Dr. Mike Patterson, it's a pleasure to meet you and be with you today.
Yeah, I've enjoyed your book, Next Level Nonprofit. We're going to get into that. But first, I'd like to just have you introduce yourself to the audience. You lead Life Remodeled, which is a community-based nonprofit that you founded in Detroit, and it's transforming neighborhoods in some of the toughest parts of town. Your book, it tells that story, but I'd like to hear about your own journey a bit. You had to go through some things before you got where you are. So tell me a little bit about that journey.
Well, I was born and raised in a very small town in northern Indiana. And when I say small town, I mean we didn't have a four-way stoplight until I was in middle school. So the words urban neighborhood revitalization were three words I never heard in succession in my upbringing. I studied business at Indiana University, and my plan was to then go to law school, become a real estate developer, and make a ton of money to fuel the kind of lifestyle I thought I wanted at that time in my life. And my junior year of college, I moved to Australia to study. I put that in quotation marks, overseas. Not a lot of studying was going on. But while I was there, I ended up experiencing what I would call a radical encounter with God that changed the entire trajectory of my life. That ended up leading to me canceling law school, moving out to California to study at seminary, becoming a pastor, and then eventually taking an even more different direction of starting this nonprofit Life Remodeled, like you said, and moving into the city of Detroit to do so.
So when you were a kid in middle school and high school, you're sitting in sophomore English class. It was not your plan to grow up to become a leader in a nonprofit?
No. At that point in my life, I wanted to be in business or in real estate development and be successful by the terms of the world as it taught me.
So this radical transformation, life transformation that you experience, this powerful encounter with God led you to change course and you decided to create Life Remodel. I mean, exactly how did that happen? How did Detroit happen? Did God put that on your heart? Was that part of who was involved and influencing you in that way? What's the genesis story for Life Remodeled?
When I was in California at seminary, I met my wife, who is someone I married way out of my league. She is a saint, an incredible human being, so much so that after we graduated seminary, we felt led to move to Africa for 9 months. And we did. And I lived in a mud hut in a Muslim village with no running water. And my job was to be a community developer there. And my wife worked in the main city of Monrovia in Liberia with at-risk women and children. And in that process of living in Africa and experiencing life there, my vision of the person of Jesus really changed significantly, where I realized that he spent the majority of his time in ministry with people who were the most marginalized and oppressed. And that really shaped me in realizing that's what he was calling his followers to do. And I don't think we all need to move into a mud hut or into the hood, but I do believe we're here on this earth to really invest a lot of our time, talents, and treasures in marginalized peoples. And so we did come to Detroit and start a church in 2007. But in 2010, I got this vision to start Life Remodeled. And that ended up becoming the organization that I realized I was supposed to invest all of my time in. And I eventually stopped pastoring churches to do so. And so I like to really describe Life Remodeled by starting with why we exist before I get into what we do or how we do it. And the reason Life Remodeled exists is because we're absolutely convinced Detroiters have all the talent they need, but many don't have access to all the opportunities they deserve. And so what we do in response to this reality is we repurpose large vacant school buildings into one-stop hubs of opportunity for entire families to thrive. And we fill these buildings with the best and brightest nonprofits who are moving the needle in 3 areas. That would be youth programs, workforce development, and health and human services. And then we help them collaborate to make far greater impact than they'd ever make alone.
So I'm a results guy. I'm a performance guy. Let's focus on some of your results. As you just said, you founded your Life Remodeled nonprofit in 2010, and between 2014 and 2022, you have invested $43.5 million into Detroit neighborhoods. You've renovated 4 school buildings, mobilized over 77,000 volunteers, beautified 2,008 city blocks, and repaired 194 homes. That's
Yes,
a
sir.
lot. That is a great track record over, what is that, 8 years. And, a year has happened since then. So the numbers are bigger. How did that happen? What did you do to make your nonprofit effective, productive, efficient, optimized? Nonprofits often get a bad rap as being a bunch of good-hearted people that don't manage well. How did you overcome that?
In my experience, most nonprofits are led by incredible people who have tremendous passion for the people they serve, but most are led by individuals who don't have a lot of experience in the for-profit world. And so in many cases, they're so outwardly focused that they're not investing the time, talents, and resources on their inward internal processes, which means they're not able to serve as many people as they know they're capable of, and they're not serving them as well as they know they're capable of. And I'm not here today on this podcast, Dr. Mike, to tell you I've done everything right, because I have made many, many mistakes. And the reality is the vast majority, if not all of my biggest mistakes were avoidable. And that led to me creating a system called Next Level Nonprofit that is now a practical, proven blueprint for organizational excellence. And we not only apply that internally, and that's what led to all those results that you're talking about, but we coach organizations externally. I wrote a book called Next Level Nonprofit where people can read it anywhere in the world and apply this methodology immediately. But I wish I would have had this resource, 14 years ago, 13 years ago when I first started this organization. But I'm here to, help others avoid those mistakes and serve more people and serve them more effectively.
And that's what we're here to talk about today. Your book, Next Level Nonprofit, which I have read and I've highlighted it. I'm involved in some nonprofits. I've been on boards in nonprofits, and I would agree. I wish I would have seen your book several years ago. It would have helped the organizations I was part of get more done. So you talked about this operating system. When we think of operating systems, or at least many of us, we think of what makes our computers run. Why is an operating system critical to an organization's success?
So on a computer or a tablet or a phone, the operating system, be it Windows or iOS or Android, is the most important system on the whole device because it integrates every other program that will ever run on there, and it makes complex inputs appear simple. When you think about an organizational operating system, it's not software, but there's 4 major components to our system. And the first one is team unity. The second one is compelling vision. The third is right strategy. And the fourth is discipline execution. And almost think of that like a flywheel on a car. And every time you turn over this flywheel, you're in a car, your car is going to go faster and faster. Organizationally speaking, when you improve those 4 major components, you're going to go to the next level and the next level after that. And it's a cycle. It's not a strictly linear journey. You're working on all 4 of these components all the time, but by far, the most important piece, and I know you and I agree with this because I've seen your work, is people, right seats, and a team of one is the most important reality or component in the entire system.
So is it hard to do? We talked about those great people who have a heart for their community, whatever their ministry focus is, they want to change lives. But this, organizational stuff, this managerial stuff, sounds like it takes a lot of time and effort. You would argue that it's worth the time and effort to slow down to speed up. But what would you say to somebody that says, "Man, I'm just in it for the people. I'm serving, and this management stuff just too much for me"? What do you say to them?
The whole why of Next Level Nonprofit is because the people that we serve as nonprofit leaders, they deserve the highest level of excellence we can possibly give them. And so that why drives every nonprofit leader I know. And most of us as nonprofit leaders, we don't geek out on operations until we start to realize how much more effectively we can serve and love people. And so that's one of the things that my book does is it connects that reality and it turns the light bulb on to where leaders finally realize I can't not do this. And so it's all about people all the time. And we need to work on our organization, not just in our organization. And so much of our time is spent on responding or reacting to the tyranny of the fierce urgency of now, instead of building a remarkable team, a compelling vision and right strategy, and having the right execution plan that will actually ensure we achieve more than we ever dreamed.
Chris, you quote Dan Sullivan from his book, Who Not How. And Dan wrote this: "The bigger the vision, the more you need who's and not how's. By the same token, your vision grows as you get more and better who's involved. I thought that was such a powerful statement. I texted it to a friend as soon as I read it because I thought that was right on target. Having the right who's always leads to the best how's. Why did you include this quote in your book, and what does it mean in the context of your work, and how did you put it into practice?
I had to learn this from the school of hard knocks, and Dan Sullivan's book was a real eye opener for me because for the first few years of starting Life Remodeled, we cycled through one person after another. We made a lot of bad hires. There was a lot of things we didn't know what we didn't know. And I relied a lot on my own gifts and talents and abilities to inspire people. And I wasn't as worried about building this incredibly dynamic team of the very best people who were united as one. And it wasn't until I recognized there is no way we can achieve the visions that are on my heart and on our hearts until we build that team of superstars, which we call reindeer. And I can explain that if anybody wants to know. And not just build a team of the best and brightest, but a team that's truly united. And by doing that, that sets us up to be able to tackle any issue that comes our way and to become stronger and stronger as the organization evolves. And so one of the things I say is, who is greater than how? Very much inspired by Dan Sullivan. And the reality of recruiting or attracting and developing and retaining the top talent, it's hard for all organizations. But I'm going to tell you, it's even more difficult in the nonprofit world. We're not allowed to pay people at market rate salaries like people are making in the for-profit industry. So we're dependent on trying to find Mother Teresas, and there aren't enough Mother Teresas in the world, right? But there are great people out there, and there are ways to develop our people to become the best versions of themselves. And a lot of us as nonprofit leaders, Dr. Mike, we just never were taught this stuff. And so that's why I want to save people from making those same failures I did, but really produce something that is going to go beyond what we even thought we could do.
Chris, you just teed up that term reindeer, and believe it or not, that was in my notes to ask you about. You use this term reindeer to refer to talent. What do you mean by that?
Well, we've heard this phrase when we talk about sometimes looking for a great new hire. Sometimes we develop these job descriptions and we say, wow, we're looking for someone so special. It's almost as if we're looking for the proverbial unicorn. Well, as we all know, unicorns don't exist. But I'm going to be honest with you. I thought reindeer were also fictional creatures. Once I learned that when I was 5 years old that Santa Claus wasn't real, I actually thought reindeer weren't real as well until I was a teenager. Someone finally educated me that reindeer are real. But when you study them, they're actually pretty amazing, radical creatures. And so we say we're looking for reindeer because they're almost mythical. And reindeer are what you might have heard of other terms like A players, rock stars, the top tier talent. Vern Harnish would say A players are the top 10% of potential candidates who are willing to accept the offer that you're offering. And so finding the very best is non-negotiable for a nonprofit. And the reality is, every time your organization becomes stronger, you actually have a higher capacity and a higher ability to attract the highest level of talent. So we're not going to attract the top tier talent overnight. As you said, Dr. Mike, this is hard. This is intentional, but the results are exponential.
Give us some practical things that you do to recruit and retain your reindeers, your best people. How do you find them? You just mentioned you can't pay them a lot of money relative to maybe the what they could make in the marketplace. But how do you find those right people and hold on to them?
Well, I think it starts with knowing who a reindeer is. And you can start today by assessing your own current team and discerning, do I have all reindeer? Or are there any people on our team who are not? And we've created this tool called the Culture and Capacity Assessment. And you're rating people green, yellow, or red. And the culture side of things is is each team member aligned with all of your core values? And as I say that, I realize probably a lot of our listeners either don't have core values, or if they do, they're not operationalizing them. Brene Brown says that only 10% of the organizations she's worked with actually operationalize your core values. And so you really can't even put this tool into place until you're fully committed to creating an intentional culture. And that always starts with and is driven by discovering your core values. You should have 3 to 7. I explain that in the book. I won't get into it on this call. But once you establish core values, you're committing that you will only hire people who fully align with your culture before they even begin working for you. And you're also committing that if you have anyone in your organization who's not exhibiting that core value most of the time, which would be scoring green, then you are going to coach them. And if they're not coachable, you're going to move them off the bus. And so when you're rating green, yellow, red, green means most of the time, yellow means some of the time, red means usually not. And green is the only acceptable score in both culture. And when it comes to capacity, you're asking 3 questions about each and every team member, including yourself. The first is, does this person understand what their job requires fully? The second is, are they fully committed to do everything their job requires passionately? And the third is, do they have the capacity to do their job with excellence? And that capacity would be time. It would be physical capacity. It would be talent capacity, skill capacity. And you're grading green, yellow, red for each person. And in the event that someone, again, just like culture, scores yellow or red, you are coaching them to rise to the level of expectations that they originally agreed to when you hired them. And if they're not coachable, you help them move off the bus. And in the nonprofit sector, I see nonprofit organizations put up with people issues even more than the for-profit sector, because we think, well, we love these people so much, there's no way we could fire them or even have candid conversations with them, when the reality is keeping non-reindeer on your team is one of the worst recipes for keeping existing reindeer, because reindeer don't want to work with non-reindeer. They don't want to work with underperformers who pull down the morale and excellence of the entire organization. And if you want to attract reindeer, then it is essential that you have a team that is comprised of the best and brightest and is working as one. And so this tool I've created really simplifies the process. It probably sounds more complex audibly than it really is once you dig into it.
And I want to clarify for the audience that in your book, you provide all these tools and resources. I assume it's okay for people to model off those because you put them in the book, and you wouldn't have put them in the book if you didn't want people to use them. But they're excellent guides. We can see exactly how you're doing it, and you've kind of laid it out to make it easy for us to do that. So I appreciated that about your book, Chris. One of the other things you wrote about that I thought was interesting was the importance of weekly 90-minute exec meetings consistently, rhythmically for your executive leadership team. Why do you think it's so important to get people together on a regular basis? And how do you make those meetings productive? I mean, executive leadership team sounds like a bunch of busy people who always have stuff to do, but why is it important to get them together to focus on each other and on the work at least once a week?
Well, we call this the weekly. This is the, as you said, 90-minute weekly executive leadership team meeting. And there is no tool that will cause your organization to develop greater traction more quickly than implementing the weekly. And our leaders on Life Remodeled's team, as well as all the organizations that we've coached, and we coach organizations in this methodology regularly, all of them say, these are the most impactful and effective leadership team meetings I've ever experienced. All right. Now, when most of us think of the word meeting, I don't think that we get very excited initially emotionally. In fact, Patrick Lencioni wrote a beautiful book called Death by Meeting. It's one of my favorite books. I read it regularly. And the idea that meetings can truly be not only exciting, but productive and actually involve healthy amounts of conflict, and really produce results is foreign to many of us. And so we've created a framework that, again, is very simple, like the tool that you just said. And all of these tools are open source. We even have a video explaining this particular tool that you're asking about on our website, nlncoaching.org. And it is revolutionary. It's very easy to understand, but it does take time to learn the discipline of how to put it into practice.
You talk about, and there's just, the reason I'm stumbling here a little bit is there's so much in the book that I do want to talk about. I also want to honor everyone's time here. Let me move on to a different section of the book and invite you to talk a little bit about the importance of having a clear unifying mission, or you call it vision. In the work I do, I tend to call it the mission. But why is having a unifying vision so important for your organization, for your herd of reindeer, and even the people you serve and partner with?
So what we teach teams how to do, and all of this is in the book, as you said, is create a 2-page strategic plan where page 1 answers the question, where are we going? That's the vision. Page 2 answers the question, how do we get there? And here's the 2 extremes I've seen in strategic planning in the nonprofit world. And mind you, these are caricatures, but I see them play out every day. Extreme 1 is an organization does not have a strategic plan, all right? Or extreme 2 is an organization's hired a consultant. They've done a wonderful job creating a beautiful 20-page plus plan that's doing a remarkable job sitting on a shelf collecting dust. And we pull it out when a funder comes by so we can say, look, we've got a strategic plan, but nobody in the organization actually knows what's in it. We may have heard this phrase, without a vision, people perish. Vision drives focus, clarity. Where are we going? Why do we exist? What do we do? How do we do it? Those are the questions that you answer on page 1, but you're also answering a question of what's your 10-year moonshot? So for example, in 1961, former President John F. Kennedy, he said, and I'm not going to quote him verbatim, but we all know this quote loosely, that we're going to put a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade's out. And when President Kennedy said that, it's important for us to understand in many ways that statement was ludicrous because the technology did not even exist to achieve that mission effectively. We didn't even know the math. But what we did as a country was we did more than just make a bold, ambitious statement, but we worked backwards from that statement. We identified the math, we created the technology, we achieved the 10-year moonshot before 1970. And when it comes to organizations setting future visions, I got to tell you, I loathe when organizationals set aspirational vision or mission statements. For example, if an organization says, oh, we envision a world by the year 2040 when no one in the world will be hungry. Well, if you have a plan to achieve that, I would love to see it and I'd love to be a part of it. But if you don't have an actual plan to achieve that, please never say that again. Because when we make aspirational vision statements that we don't actually intend to achieve, what we're telling people is that we're full of hot air and that we don't actually expect them to do what we're calling them to do. And so when we create these 10-year moonshot statements, we're creating goals that are very ambitious, but they're also tempered by realism. So if President Kennedy would have said, we're going to go to Mars and back before 1970, that would have been impossible. We could say something like that today. But if he would have said, we're going to the sun and back, that's just straight impossible, right? So getting that clear vision into one page and then getting your clear strategy of how you're actually going to achieve it down to one page, it creates a document that you can rally the entire organization around where everyone can answer those questions clearly and succinctly. And I would ask right now for all of our listeners to be honest with ourselves and say, wow, I wonder what would happen if I asked everyone in my organization to write down where we're going over the next 10 years and how we're going to get there. And how many of those responses would be similar? If we're honest with ourselves, typically not very many of them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You brought up the Kennedy moonshot example. Kennedy made that speech to Congress in the spring, and then later in the summer, he made another speech and said, "We choose to go to the moon, and we choose to do the hard things. We don't do it because it's easy, but we choose to do the hard things." And uh, two points jump out at me from that statement. Developing these moonshot plans and creating our vision is something we need to be very intentional about. It's making choices about how we're going to use our resources and time and apply our energies. But these 10-year moonshots aren't going to be easy, but they're worthwhile. They're righteous causes, at least in the case of most nonprofits. Chris, I want to ask you, this has been running through my head the whole time we've been in this conversation. Is it harder, do you think, to manage in a nonprofit environment versus a for-profit environment? Because many of my listeners are in the marketplace. They work in for-profit business settings. Maybe they work for a government agency. You think working in a nonprofit is tougher? Leading a nonprofit is tougher?
Oh, I love this question. All right. So I am absolutely convinced if you have a for-profit and a nonprofit that are doing the same amount of revenue, let's say they both have annual revenues of $3 million. Leading that nonprofit is far more complex in every scenario of businesses and organizations the same size. Here's why. In the for-profit world, usually your customers, the people that you need to please to buy your products or services, they're the ones that are paying for your revenue, right? In the nonprofit world, this is not the case in the vast majority of experiences. Our clients in the nonprofit world are not paying us for services typically. And so we need to please our clients, serve them well. We need to please our donors, serve them well. We need to please our volunteers and serve them well. And we need to please our board members and serve them well. On top of that, our bottom line is not just financial revenue or profit. Our bottom line is social impact and the complexities of working with people who are experiencing marginalization and oppression are extremely intense emotionally. You put all these factors together, running a nonprofit is more complex as long as it's comparable in size to the for-profit that we're talking about. All the more reason are these business principles that have been around for decades. By the way, most of what I'm writing about in this book has been in existence for many decades, proven methodologies by incredible companies. And those who are listening today in the marketplace, I would encourage you to reach out to your nonprofit friends and the nonprofits you love and just help them to see just how important these principles are in your place of work so that they can begin to understand how valuable they can be in theirs.
I agree with you, Chris. I've always felt that working in nonprofits, in ministries where the complexities are more greater and the constituencies are much broader is more challenging. Tell me a story. In fact, tell me your favorite transformational story about a person or a family your work has impacted, because I'm sure these stories drive you to build this organizational excellence. It inspires the people that work with you and around you. What's a story that you just get choked up when you talk about it, that's based on work that your team has done?
I won't say any names to protect the anonymity because I'm a big believer in not exploiting people. And yet I'll tell a story without any names. And so back to these school buildings that we repurpose and we fill them up with these organizations where all of these opportunities are in one place. For instance, the largest literacy program in the region is in our building. And literacy is absolutely essential to success. In fact, most states determine how many prisons to build for the future based on how many kids are reading at a third grade level by the end of third grade, because it's literally a science for those who are not getting those skills. Because up to third grade, you're learning how to read, and after third grade, you're reading to learn. Well, I'm thinking of a child who was 4 grades behind in reading and came to programming in our building and not only got to grade level, but surpassed it. And this child's mother was seeking employment that would help her to actually achieve economic self-sufficiency. And usually that resource wouldn't be available because that child would only be in a literacy program. But because that family came to our building where there was a resource for workforce development initiatives, now this mother got a new job opportunity and is providing for her family at a whole new level and changing generations. And that child that's getting literacy support is getting something so fundamental and critical to human success that we all need, and going even beyond that with a variety of enrichment programs that are happening every day in our building. And so seeing stories like that on a regular basis are what inspire me to not only keep going, but to work even more diligently on building great teams, compelling vision, right strategy, discipline, execution, so we can go further, faster.
I love it. Chris, it's our tradition here on the Mission First People Always podcast to end our conversations with a very practical question. Could you give our listeners one thing that they could begin doing right away that would help them become a better leader?
I'm going to talk about a language shift. And Vern Harnish is the first person that I saw say this. And I changed my language from the day I read it and scaling up. He said, let's stop calling the people who we manage direct reports, and let's start calling them direct supports, because it shifts the conversation from you report to me to my job. And we actually don't call people managers, we call them coaches. Start calling yourself a coach rather than a manager, because your job and my job as a leader is to support the people that are our direct supports and help them become the best versions of themselves they can become, rather than what they can do for us.
Sounds a little bit like servant leadership. And
Yes, sir.
what I often say is one of the leader's primary responsibilities is to bring out the best in the people around them.
Hmm.
Chris, thank you. Time has flown by. This has been a tremendously valuable conversation, and people can reach you. I hope they will reach you, because I've put your contact information in the show notes. I wish you great success in your work. You have an open invitation to come hang out in Southern California if you'd ever like to take advantage of that. And I just pray that God continues to use you and your team to transform the city of Detroit.
Thank you, Mike. I live in Detroit, so come December, January, February, an invitation to Southern California is very compelling.
Well, thanks, Chris. We've been speaking with Dr. Chris Lambert, who is the author of the book, Next Level Nonprofit. And if you are involved with a nonprofit now, whether you work for one, you're on the board of one, you're thinking about starting one, or you've ever donated to one, and I think that's probably just about everyone, you need to get a copy of Chris's book. I think I'm going to buy a couple of copies for friends and give them away, but you really should grab a copy of his book. And if you are in the thick of growing a nonprofit, maybe you want to reach out to Chris and invite him to be your coach, or learn from him. He's made some mistakes, he said, So maybe you don't need to make those same mistakes if you're learning from somebody who has. So I appreciate Chris taking the time to be with us today. And let me remind you, my friends, as I always do, subscribe or follow, leave a review, and tell a friend about what we're doing here on the podcast. It helps people find us, and maybe they might want to be part of a conversation that we're having in the future. So the big idea behind this podcast and my book is that if we have a righteous mission, we stay focused on it, we get the right people on board to help accomplish that mission, and you take care of them, you're in the best position to succeed and even do something great. So until next time.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to create a stronger, more people-centric and empowered culture for your organization, visit drmikepatterson.com.